Hey everyone, Slambo here, hopping on another contest. This is for Redrum Records, the I Love the 80s contest. She asked us to show some movies and some records that were released in the 80s and to ask a trivia question based on the decade of the 1980s. My trivia question will be based on something I show, but we'll get to that. So first, at least 3 movies from the 80s that were my favorites. Well, I've got several, just rating my DVD collection here. We've got the Back to the Future trilogy. It depends on how you define the 80s, but if you define the 80s as including 1990, then all 3 of these movies were released in the 80s, with the first one released in, looking at my notes here, 1985. Episode 2 was released in 1989. And episode 3, which is filmed concurrently with this episode 2, which is why I include it in the 80s, was released in 1990. So Back to the Future trilogy is the first 3 movies that I'm going to show. Second one is from one of my favorite directors, Spaceballs. This was released in 1987. Mel Brooks was allowed to make this parody if he did not do any merchandising for it, which is why there's a merchandising joke in the middle of it. Let's see, the next one on my list is one that I actually got to see in the theaters. It's the original Tron, released in 1982. One of my favorite Disney films of all time. And then we've also got Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was released in 1988. And this one is the deluxe set, which is packaged in what looks kind of like a valise. And then, from one of my favorite comedy troupes of all time, Monty Python, The Meaning of Life, was released in 1983. So there's a few movies from the 80s. For the records, I'm going to stick with one specific category of records, and that's Dr. Demento compilations, because I have several of them, and they were released in the 1980s. I'm going to show these in chronological order here. So first one we've got is Dr. Demento's Dementia Royale. This one was released in 1980. This one has The Punk Polka, My Bologna, Pencil Neck Geek, Phantom Windbreaker, Davy's Dinghy, Star Direct, and Dr. Demento appears on here singing Shaving Cream. There's a few more tracks on there. Next one I've got is from 1982. This is a recent pickup, Dr. Demento's Demento's Mementos. There are so many of them, I always have to look at it. This one has I Get Weird, Space Invaders, Mediocre Mama, My Name Is Not Merv Griffin, Harry's Jockstrap, and I Found the Brains of Santa Claus, among others. Found that one at the record show in Milwaukee a couple of weeks ago. Next one is actually a box set, but I'm missing the box. I have everything else that came inside the box. It's Dr. Demento Presents the Greatest Novelty Records of All Time. They were all signed and numbered. Mine is number 15213, so there's a signature down at the bottom there. So I kept the inserts, but I don't know what I did with the box, and I kind of wish I had the box now. So I'll have to get the box. But it came with 6 records. So Greatest Novelty Records of All Time, the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, and Christmas. So these got a lot of airplay on my radio show back in the late 80s, early 90s. And after that was released, he did a similar release on CD called Dr. Demento Presents the Greatest Novelty CD of All Time. On Rhino Records, released in 1988. This one includes Poisoning Pigeons in the Park, King Tut, Star Trekkin', Fish Heads, Junk Food Junkie, The Monster Mash, Pencil Neck Geek again, Earache My Eye, and it ends with They're Coming to Take Me Away, haha. So there's the music, or the albums that were released in the 80s. The third question that we were asked is to make up a trivia question. And it took me a little bit to think of a good one here, but I'm going to relate it back to something that I showed already. My question is, which movie that I've shown in this video was listed after its release in the Guinness Book of World Records and why was it listed there? There is one specific answer that I'm looking for. There may be more than one answer that are valid based on the 6 or 7-ish, if you count the sequels, movies that I showed. But there is definitely one answer that I'm looking for that is correct, and it actually shows up on all the sites, including IMDb. So it shouldn't be that hard to look up if you just take a little bit of time. So that's what I've got. We've got movies, we've got records and a CD, and we've got a trivia question from the 1980s. So that's what I've got today. See you next time.